The first time I realized my new neighbor was going to be trouble, she was standing on top of a pile of lumber wearing spotless white boots and arguing with a survey crew she'd hired herself. 10 minutes later, she was pointing directly at my property line and telling them the marker was wrong. 3 months later, that same woman would lose more than $100,000, destroy her own reputation, and turn her dream home into the most expensive mistake of her life. Before I tell you what happened, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. And if you've ever had a neighbor who thought the rules applied to everyone except them, you're probably going to enjoy this one. My name is Daniel Harper. I'm 58 years old, retired from commercial trucking, and I live outside a little town called Red Creek, Montana. It's the kind of place where people still wave when they pass each other on back roads. Nobody cares what kind of truck you drive, nobody complains about the color of your fence, and if somebody's barn roof blows off during a storm, half the county shows up with ladders before sunrise. I've lived on the same piece of land for almost 30 years. Not because it's fancy, not because it's valuable, because it's home. My wife, Linda, and I bought those 6 acres when we were still young enough to believe our backs would never hurt. We spent years clearing brush, planting trees, fixing fences, and building the little life we wanted. We raised our daughter there. We buried 2 old dogs under the oak tree by the creek. Every corner of that property carried memories. For a long time, the lot next door sat empty. Then one spring, everything changed. The new owner was a woman named Vanessa Cole. Vanessa was in her mid-40s, recently divorced, originally from Seattle, and apparently very proud of the fact that she had escaped city life. You would have thought she discovered Montana personally. The first week after she bought the property, she posted dozens of videos online about her country living journey. Every video featured expensive outdoor furniture. Every video featured designer clothes. Every video featured some speech about simplicity and authentic rural life. None of them involved actual work. The locals noticed immediately. You can tell a lot about people out here by how they treat others. Vanessa treated everyone like employees she hadn't hired yet. The cashier at the grocery store, the guy delivering gravel, the county inspector, even the volunteer firefighters. Everybody got the same smile. The kind that's technically polite but somehow still insulting. At first, I stayed out of it. People move here all the time thinking they're buying some version of Yellowstone they saw on television. Most eventually settle down, some leave. Either way, it usually isn't my business, but then construction started, and that's when things got interesting. Vanessa wasn't building a normal house. She was building what she called a luxury mountain estate. The project looked more like a resort than a family home. Excavators arrived. Concrete trucks arrived. Architects showed up. Landscape designers came and went. The entire hillside transformed into a construction zone. Every morning I drank coffee on my porch and watched another small army of contractors appear. I didn't care. As long as they stayed on their side of the line, they could build a castle for all I cared. For the first few weeks, that's exactly what I thought was happening. Then one afternoon, while walking along the boundary fence, I noticed something strange. The old survey marker near the eastern corner looked unusually close to a freshly dug trench. That marker had been there for decades. I knew exactly where it was. I had painted it myself more than once. Still, I told myself I was probably imagining things. Construction sites always look chaotic. Maybe it only seemed close because of the angle. Maybe I was overthinking it. A few days later, I checked again. The trench was even closer. My stomach tightened. Not because I thought someone was stealing my land, because I hoped they weren't. There are some arguments you never want to have with neighbors. Property disputes are near the top of that list. I measured the distance twice, then 3 times. The numbers didn't make sense. The next morning, I walked back carrying an old survey map I'd kept in a filing cabinet since the 90s. I compared the measurements, then compared them again. That was the moment my heart sank. The foundation wasn't approaching the property line. It had crossed it, not by much, 6 inches. 6 inches of reinforced concrete, 6 inches of steel, 6 inches of somebody else's structure sitting on my land. Now maybe some people hear 6 inches and think that's nothing. Maybe they're right. Maybe 6 inches doesn't sound like much, but property rights don't work that way. If somebody parks their car halfway in your garage, you don't suddenly own less garage. And if somebody builds part of their house on your property, that doesn't magically become acceptable because the mistake is small. I stood there staring at that foundation for several minutes. Part of me hoped I was wrong. Part of me wanted someone else to tell me I had measured incorrectly. Instead, the more I checked, the clearer it became. They were over the line. That afternoon, I decided to speak with Vanessa directly. No lawyers, no arguments, no drama, just a simple conversation. At least that was the plan. When I arrived at the construction site, she was standing beside a black SUV talking into her phone. The moment she saw me approaching, she looked annoyed, not curious, not concerned, annoyed, as if my presence itself was inconveniencing her. I waited until she finished the call. "Afternoon," I said. She lowered her sunglasses. "Can I help you?" I explained what I'd found. I pointed toward the survey marker. I described the measurements. I even apologized for bothering her. Looking back, I shouldn't have apologized for anything. She listened for about 10 seconds, then she laughed. Actually laughed, not nervous laughter, not surprised laughter, dismissive laughter, the kind people use when they've already decided you're wrong. "Oh, that," she said. I blinked. "That," she waved her hand toward the foundation. "It's a few inches." I stared at her. "A few inches onto my property," she shrugged. "Our mapping software shows everything is fine." Mapping software, not a survey, not county records, not certified measurements. Software. I took a slow breath. "Those apps aren't accurate enough for property boundaries." "They're accurate enough," she replied. "No, they're not," she smiled. The conversation should have ended there. A reasonable person would have said something like, "Let's verify it," or maybe "Let's pause construction until we know for sure." Instead, Vanessa crossed her arms. "Daniel, right? Yes. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." I felt irritation creeping into my voice. "This isn't a molehill, it's a permanent foundation. It's 6 inches. There shouldn't be any inches." That wiped the smile off her face for a second, not because she agreed, because she didn't like being challenged. I could see it. Some people treat every disagreement like a personal attack. Vanessa was one of those people. She looked toward the workers, then back at me. "We've already invested hundreds of thousands of dollars into this project." I nodded. "I understand. We're not tearing out a foundation." "I didn't ask you to." "Then what do you want?" "I want a licensed surveyor to verify the line before construction continues." For a moment she said nothing. Then she rolled her eyes, actually rolled her eyes, like a teenager being asked to clean her room. "That's ridiculous." "No, it's responsible. It's 6 inches." The way she kept repeating those words told me something important. She wasn't interested in facts. She was interested in convenience. The foundation was already poured. Fixing the mistake would cost money. Therefore, in her mind, it couldn't be a mistake. That's how she saw the world. Reality adjusted itself around whatever was easiest for her. I tried one last time. "Vanessa, if there's a problem, it's better to fix it now." She smiled again. Only this time the smile felt colder. "If there's a problem later, we'll deal with it later." That sentence stayed with me all night. "We'll deal with it later." As if property law worked like a delayed dentist appointment. As if consequences could be scheduled. As if ignoring a problem somehow made it disappear. I went home frustrated, not angry, not yet, just disappointed, because deep down I still believed common sense would win. The next morning I dug through old records stored in my garage. Survey documents, county maps, property transfers, anything related to the land. By noon I had enough paperwork to remove all doubt. The line was exactly where I'd always known it was. The encroachment was real. And for the first time I started to understand something important. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't an honest mistake anymore, because Vanessa had already been told, and she had chosen not to care. I didn't know it then, but that choice was about to cost her more than she could possibly imagine. And the real fight hadn't even started yet. The next morning, I drove into town and met with a surveyor named Carl Jensen. Around Red Creek, Carl was the guy people called when property lines became arguments. He'd been doing it for nearly 30 years, and unlike Vanessa's phone app, Carl's measurements actually held up in court. 3 days later, he arrived with equipment that looked like it belonged on a NASA launch site. tripods, laser instruments, GPS receivers worth more than my pickup. The entire time he worked, I stayed quiet. I didn't want influence. I wanted facts. Vanessa, on the other hand, treated the whole thing like an inconvenience. She stood nearby with a coffee cup in one hand and her phone in the other, occasionally filming clips for social media. At one point, I heard her telling followers that she was dealing with small-town resistance to progress. I almost laughed. By mid-afternoon, Carl finished his measurements. Then he called both of us over. The look on his face told me everything before he said a word. The original marker is correct. Vanessa immediately frowned. Carl continued. The foundation extends approximately 6 inches beyond the legal property boundary. Silence. For a moment, I actually thought she might accept it. Maybe hearing it from a professional would make a difference. Maybe she'd finally realize this wasn't personal. Then she surprised all of us. I don't agree, Carl blinked. You don't agree with the measurements. I think they're outdated. Carl looked genuinely confused. Ma'am, I measured them today. That earned a few awkward chuckles from the workers. Vanessa didn't appreciate them. She crossed her arms. Well, maybe the county records are wrong. Carl stared at her for several seconds before slowly packing up his equipment. I could tell he'd dealt with difficult people before, but even he looked impressed, not in a good way. As he walked back toward his truck, he quietly said something I'll never forget. Some folks don't want answers, they want confirmation. Then he drove away. Vanessa immediately turned toward me. Happy now? No. That answer caught her off guard. No, because now we have a verified problem. She sighed dramatically. Daniel, be realistic. There it was again, realistic, the favorite word of people asking someone else to accept something unfair. She pointed toward the construction site. The house is already underway. I know, the contractors are scheduled for months. I know, we can't just stop. You can. We won't. The conversation was over before it started. That evening, I sat on my porch with Linda and explained everything. She listened quietly. That was one thing I always admired about her. She never rushed to react. When I finished, she took a sip of coffee and asked a simple question. What kind of person keeps building after a certified survey says they're wrong? I looked across the field toward the glow of construction lights. A person who thinks consequences happen to other people. A week passed. Then 2. Instead of slowing down, construction accelerated. Walls started going up. Framing crews arrived. The project moved forward as if the survey had never happened. That's when I realized something had changed. This wasn't a disagreement anymore. It was deliberate. Every nail being driven into that structure was another decision, another choice, another opportunity to stop. And every day Vanessa chose not to. Then things got weird. One Saturday morning I walked outside and found a notice taped to my mailbox. Not from the county, not from an attorney, not from any government office. Heading read, Red Creek Community Association notice. I stared at it, then read it again. There was no Red Creek Community Association, not officially, not legally, not in any form whatsoever. The letter informed me that I had violated neighborhood appearance standards by storing firewood where it was visible from adjoining properties. I laughed so hard coffee nearly came out my nose. Linda thought I was having some kind of medical episode. What is it? I handed her the paper. She read it. Then laughed harder than I did. At the bottom of the notice was a signature. Vanessa Cole, acting community president, of a community that didn't exist. That should have been my warning that things were about to get much stranger. A few days later, I discovered she convinced several newer residents to attend what she called community planning meetings. Apparently, she'd been pitching the idea of creating a homeowners association. The problem was simple. You can't magically create an HOA after properties have already been sold without proper legal procedures, especially not when existing owners never agreed to it. But details like legality never seemed to slow Vanessa down. One afternoon, I was driving home when I noticed a large sign near her driveway. The sign read, Future Home of the Red Creek Community Association. Underneath was a slogan, Building Better Neighborhood Standards. The sign looked professionally made, which somehow made it even funnier and more concerning, because people willing to spend money on nonsense are often willing to spend money fighting reality too. Around that time, I finally met with an attorney. His name was Richard Mason, Gray hair, sharp eyes, the kind of man who looked permanently unimpressed. I brought him everything. The survey, photos, construction records, notes from every conversation, even copies of Vanessa's fake community notices. Richard spent nearly an hour reviewing the documents. Then he leaned back in his chair. Well, what? You have one of the strongest encroachment cases I've seen in years. That was encouraging. What happens next? We give her a chance to correct it. And if she doesn't, he smiled slightly, then things become very expensive. A formal legal notice was sent the following week. Professional, clear, direct. It explained the encroachment, referenced the survey, demanded immediate corrective action, offered an opportunity to resolve the issue before litigation. Exactly the kind of document reasonable people take seriously. Vanessa responded 3 days later, not through an attorney, not through a surveyor, not through the county. She responded with another community association notice. This one was printed on bright blue paper. According to the letter, I was creating a hostile environment that threatened neighborhood unity. Neighborhood unity. There were 4 houses within a mile. One belonged to an 80-year-old retired teacher who barely left her porch. Another belonged to a rancher who spent most of the year following cattle. The idea of neighborhood unity was ridiculous. Richard loved the letter, actually loved it. When I handed him a copy, he smiled for the first time since I'd met him. This helps us. How? It shows she understands the dispute exists. He tapped the paper. And it shows she's choosing to ignore the legal issue. For the first time, I started seeing the situation differently. Every ridiculous thing Vanessa did wasn't helping her. It was helping me. Every fake notice, every social media post, every refusal to stop construction, she was building evidence. The strange thing was she seemed completely unaware of it. The bigger the problem became, the more confident she looked, almost cheerful, as if she genuinely believed she was winning. Then came the moment that changed everything. One afternoon, I noticed a worker installing a decorative stone wall near the disputed area. The wall extended directly across the section that sat on my property. I walked over immediately. Vanessa was there supervising. Of course she was. I pointed at the wall. You're expanding the encroachment. No. The wall crosses the line. She glanced at it, then shrugged. It looks better there. I honestly didn't know what to say. It looks better. Yes, that's your legal argument, she smiled. Sometimes common sense matters more than paperwork. I stood there staring at her. That sentence explained everything. She truly believed preferences outranked property rights. A few workers nearby exchanged nervous looks. One of them quietly focused on his tools. Nobody wanted to be part of that conversation. I took a slow breath. Vanessa, what? This is your last warning. Her smile faded. Is that a threat? No, it's a promise. For the first time, I saw something flicker behind her confidence. Not fear, not yet, but uncertainty, just for a second. Then it disappeared. She stepped closer. What exactly are you going to do? I looked directly at her. I'm done asking. Neither of us said anything for several moments. The construction equipment hummed behind us. Wind moved through the pine trees. Finally, she laughed again, that same dismissive laugh, the one she'd used the first day. Good luck. I nodded. Then turned around and walked away. No argument, no shouting, no dramatic speech, because by then I understood something important. The fight wasn't happening on her construction site anymore. It wasn't happening at the property line, and it definitely wasn't happening in conversations. The fight was moving somewhere she couldn't charm, bully, or talk her way through. The legal system. And once it got there, all her confidence, all her signs, all her imaginary authority and social media speeches were about to collide with something she had spent months ignoring. Reality. A week later, Richard called me. His voice sounded almost excited. We're filing. I looked out my kitchen window toward Vanessa's nearly finished dream home, the house she'd refused to stop building, the house she'd expanded after multiple warnings, the house she'd convinced herself was untouchable. When? I asked. Tomorrow morning. I sat quietly for several seconds, then nodded. Let's do it. Because after months of patience, documentation, surveys, warnings, and opportunities to fix the problem, there was only one path left, and Vanessa had chosen it herself. She just didn't know yet how much it was going to cost. The lawsuit was filed on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday afternoon, everyone within 20 miles seemed to know about it. That's how small towns work. News travels faster than weather. Somebody sees a county vehicle parked somewhere. Somebody else hears a rumor at the feed store, and before dinner half the county has their own version of the story. I wasn't interested in gossip. I was interested in facts, and the facts were finally catching up to Vanessa. The first sign of trouble appeared when her contractors started disappearing. At first it was only one crew, then another, then another. Apparently construction companies become very cautious when they learn part of a project is involved in active litigation. Funny how that works. One evening I noticed only a single pickup truck parked at the site. The place that had looked like a busy commercial project for months suddenly felt abandoned. For the first time since this whole mess started, I saw something different in Vanessa. Stress. Real stress. The confidence wasn't completely gone, but cracks were showing. A week later, I saw her arguing with someone in a suit near the driveway. The conversation looked heated. Lots of pointing, lots of arm waving. Eventually, the man got into his car and left. Vanessa kicked a landscaping stone so hard she nearly lost her balance. I probably shouldn't have laughed, but I did. Then came the settlement offer. Richard called me late one afternoon. They want to negotiate. I leaned back in my chair. What are they offering? $10,000. I almost dropped the phone. 10,000. Yes. For permanent use of your land, I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. Months earlier, I might have considered a discussion. Months earlier, there had been options. Months earlier, the foundation could have been corrected. Now the structure was nearly complete. Every warning had been ignored. Every opportunity had been rejected. Every bad decision had compounded the next one. Richard didn't even sound concerned. They're nervous. How can you tell? They wouldn't offer money if they thought they were winning. That made sense. The offer was declined. The case moved forward. Over the next several months, our legal team built what Richard called an avalanche. Survey reports, photographs, videos, construction timelines, recorded statements. Copies of every fake community notice Vanessa had issued. Even screenshots from social media where she publicly discussed continuing construction after being warned. The deeper we dug, the worse it looked for her. One particular video became everyone's favorite. In it, Vanessa stood beside the disputed section of property explaining to her followers that some people become obsessed with technicalities and fail to appreciate progress. Behind her, visible for several seconds, was the survey marker proving she was wrong. Richard nearly framed the screenshot. As the court date approached, Vanessa became more aggressive online. She posted long videos about standing up to bullies. She claimed she was defending community development. She hinted that certain local residents were trying to sabotage successful women. Every post generated more evidence. Every rant created new problems. At one point, she even suggested that future community regulations would prevent conflicts like this. Future community regulations. For an association that didn't legally exist. It was incredible. The closer she got to court, the more she seemed convinced she was winning. Then the big day finally arrived. 8 months after that first conversation at the property line. 8 months after 6 inches became a war. The courthouse sat in a neighboring county about 40 minutes away. I arrived early. Richard was already there. He carried 3 thick boxes of documents. Seeing those boxes gave me a strange sense of calm, because inside those boxes lived the truth. And truth has a way of surviving even the loudest arguments. About 20 minutes later, Vanessa arrived. The first thing I noticed was that she looked tired, not physically, emotionally, like someone who hadn't slept well in a long time, but the attitude was still there. She walked through the courthouse doors like she was attending an award ceremony. Expensive blazer, perfect hair, determined expression. She barely acknowledged anyone. Her attorney followed behind carrying a laptop and a thin folder. Compared to Richard's mountain of evidence, it looked hopelessly small. When court began, the judge wasted very little time. She had clearly reviewed the preliminary filings, and she had clearly developed questions, lots of questions. Richard presented our case first. The timeline, the survey, the warnings, the refusal to stop construction, the additional construction after receiving legal notice. One piece at a time, methodical. Precise, unavoidable. The judge paid close attention, especially to the videos. When footage appeared showing Vanessa dismissing the survey results, the judge made several notes. When footage appeared showing continued construction after written warnings, she made more notes. When copies of the fake community notices were introduced, she actually paused. "I'm sorry," the judge said. "What exactly is this organization?" The courtroom became very quiet. Richard answered carefully. "It does not legally exist, Your Honor." The judge looked toward Vanessa. "You issued these notices." Vanessa straightened in her chair. "Yes." "Under what authority?" She hesitated. For the first time all day, she hesitated. That hesitation told me more than any answer could. The judge moved on. Then came the surveys. Multiple licensed professionals, multiple measurements, identical conclusions. The structure crossed the property line. There was no ambiguity left. None. When it was finally her turn to testify, Vanessa walked to the witness stand looking confident. For about 5 minutes, then reality arrived. The judge asked simple questions, clear questions, questions that required direct answers. Were you informed of the property dispute? Yes. Did you receive survey results? Yes. Did you continue construction afterward? Yes. Did you receive legal notice? Yes. Did you continue construction afterward? Another pause, then came the answer. Yes. Each answer felt like another brick being added to a wall she was building herself. At one point she attempted to explain that the encroachment was minor. The judge stopped her. "Minor according to whom?" Vanessa blinked. The judge continued. "Property rights do not become optional because a violation is small." You could almost feel the energy leave the room. The case was over at that moment. Everyone knew it. Even Vanessa seemed to know it. The only thing left was the ruling. After a brief recess, the judge returned. The courtroom stood, then sat again, and everything became very quiet. The judge reviewed the facts, the surveys, the warnings, the continued construction, the deliberate decisions made after receiving notice. Then she delivered the conclusion. The encroachment was willful, not accidental, not negligent, willful. That single word changed everything. Because intentional violations carry consequences, serious consequences. The court ordered compensation for the permanent easement. Compensation based on professional valuation. Not Vanessa's valuation, not a convenient valuation, a legal valuation. Then came attorney fees, survey costs, administrative costs, recording fees, additional penalties. The numbers kept growing. I watched Vanessa's expression change with each one. Confidence, confusion, concern, shock, then panic. By the time the total was announced, the room was silent. The amount exceeded $100,000. Vanessa looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under her. For several seconds she simply stared, then she stood up. "This isn't fair." Nobody responded. The judge remained calm. The ruling stood. Court was adjourned, just like that. 8 months of conflict ended in less than an hour. Outside the courthouse, reporters from a local newspaper approached. I declined interviews. I wasn't interested in becoming a story. I wanted my life back. Over the following months, the consequences continued. The property became difficult to sell. The legal history scared buyers away. The financial burden grew heavier. Construction loans became problems. Additional expenses appeared. Stress multiplied. One afternoon, nearly a year after the dispute began, I noticed a moving truck parked outside Vanessa's house. A large moving truck. The kind people rent when they're leaving for good. Furniture disappeared. Boxes appeared. The landscaping she'd obsessed over sat neglected. By sunset, most of the house was empty. The next morning she was gone. No farewell, no apology, no dramatic final confrontation, just gone. And honestly, that felt right. Life isn't always wrapped up with perfect speeches. Sometimes people simply leave. The months afterward were peaceful, wonderfully peaceful. The signs disappeared. The notices stopped. The drama ended. For the first time in a long while, Red Creek felt normal again. Then something happened that I never expected. About 6 months later, a young couple purchased the property. Their names were Ethan and Rachel Morgan. The first week after moving in, they came to my front porch carrying a folder. Immediately, I assumed there was another problem. Instead, Ethan smiled. We wanted to introduce ourselves. Simple, polite, normal. I had almost forgotten what normal neighbors looked like. We sat outside for nearly 2 hours talking. Eventually, the conversation turned to the easement. Rachel opened the folder. "We found all the paperwork," I nodded. "There was a lot of paperwork," she laughed. "That's one way to describe it." Then Ethan surprised me. "We'd like to resolve everything permanently." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "We want to purchase the easement rights outright. No arguments, no negotiations, no imaginary associations. Just a straightforward conversation between reasonable adults." Within a few weeks, the agreement was finalized. Clean, simple, respectful. The money helped fund something I'd dreamed about for years. A small cabin overlooking the creek at the back of my property. Nothing fancy. Just a quiet place where I could drink coffee in the mornings and watch the sunrise through the trees. These days, I spend a lot of time there. Sometimes I sit on the porch and think about everything that happened. And the funny thing is, the story was never really about 6 inches. Not really. It was about respect, about accountability, about what happens when somebody becomes so convinced they're right that they stop listening to everyone around them. Vanessa didn't lose because of a measurement. She lost because every opportunity to correct the mistake was treated as an obstacle instead of a warning. She confused confidence with wisdom. She confused stubbornness with strength. And eventually reality sent the bill. The property line still sits exactly where it always did. The survey marker is still there. The creek still flows. The trees still sway in the wind. And every once in a while, when I walk that boundary, I remember something my father used to say. People don't usually get into trouble because they make mistakes. They get into trouble because they refuse to admit them. Maybe that's the real lesson here. Now I'd love to hear your thoughts. If your neighbor built part of their house onto your property and then refused to fix it, what would you have done? Would you have taken the settlement, gone straight to court, or handled it differently? Let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about neighbor disputes, property rights, HOA drama, and ordinary people standing their ground, make sure you subscribe because trust me, there are plenty more unbelievable stories coming your way.